There are words that should not be said aloud, and that night, a man came to the confessional to pronounce them. I did not know, as I adjusted my purple stole in the weak light of the sacristy, that this would be the confession that would doubt me of everything I believed about justice, truth, and redemption. I didn't know that within minutes, I would no longer be just a priest who hears sins, and would make me witness to something that should never have been revealed. The church was empty. It was always like this after 10 at night, only the old smell of incense, melted wax, and varnished wood. Silence was dense, almost alive, as if the walls kept all the confessions already made there, all the tears already spilled, all the secrets already buried under the weight of prayers. I walked through the central nave. My steps echoed on the stone floor, the altar candles shaved, throwing long shadows that danced into the stained glass. There was something sacred in that silence, but also something oppressive, as if God were there but also waiting, watching. The confessional was a shadow box in the right corner of the ship, away from the stained glass, away from the light of the candlesticks. Made of dark and heavy wood, he looked more like a tomb than a place of redemption. Inside, no one saw us. No one heard, only God. Or so I thought. I sat next to me, adjusting the stole on my shoulders. The grid between me and the penitent was fine, old, marked by the fingers of decades of confessions. I could see figures through her but never complete faces. That's how it had to be. The confessional protected the sinner's identity, protected your dignity. But that night I would like to see his face. I wish I could have looked into the eyes of the man who was about to destroy me inside. I heard the steps before seeing him, firm steps, insurance. It was not the hesitating steps of those who carry visible guilt. They were not the hasty steps of those seeking urgent relief. They were the footsteps of someone used to walking through silent corridors where everyone lowers their heads. Steps of authority. Steps of those who decide and are not questioned. The confessional door opened slowly. He entered. When he sat down, I felt the weight of his presence even before hearing his voice. It was not a physical weight. It was something deeper, a density in the air, as if he brought with him the weight of decisions, lives, destinations, the creak of the wood, the controlled breath, the dense silence of those who are calculating every word. I waited. I always hope. It is part of the ritual. It is part of respect for the moment. Then he said, "Forgive me, Father, because I have sinned." The voice was serious, paused, polite, a voice trained to speak in public, to convince, to decide. There was no tremor on her. There was no hurry. It was the voice of a man who spent his days speaking with absolute authority. "How long since your last confession?" I asked, keeping the tone soft, neutral, as I always do. There was a break. Too long. I know these breaks. They say more than words. They are the space where guilt lives, the interval between what we are and what we pretend to be. 3 years. 3 years. Enough time for a guilt to become chronic, something that lives in the spine, that wakes up together every day, that eats inside slowly, like metal rust. "I'm listening," I said, keeping my voice firm but kind. He took a deep breath. I heard the sound of the air entering his lungs, pausing, leaving, as if preparing to dive, and it started. I made a mistake, a serious mistake, and since then, I can't sleep anymore. Severe errors are not new to the confessional. I've heard of everything. Marital betrayals, thefts, lies that ruined whole families, addictions that destroyed careers. But there was something different in that man's voice. He was not venting. It was not looking for comfort. I was delivering something, as who puts a heavy object on the floor because it can't stand it anymore. "Continue," I asked, feeling my attention sharp. "I work in the judiciary. I can't say much more than that, but 3 years ago, I made a decision that destroyed the life of an innocent person." The words fell like stones at the bottom of a well. Innocent. He didn't say, "I think she was innocent." I didn't say, "Maybe I was wrong." He said, "Innocent, for sure, with knowledge." I felt a cold climb the back of the neck. "How do you know this person was innocent?" I asked, choosing each word carefully. "Because I saw the tests. Or rather, I saw the absence of evidence. I saw the contradictions. I saw the failures in the process. I saw the testimonials that did not fit. And yet," I went on. "Why?" The question came out raw, direct. Silence. A silence that weighed tons. I heard the sound of his breath on the other side, deep, controlled, as if he was trying to keep the composure. "Because, priest, and you had already decided. And in my position, going back would be to admit that the system failed, that I failed, and that could not happen." I felt my throat dry. I already knew, even before he said explicitly, what was his profession. He was not a lawyer. He was not a promoter. He was not a scribe. He was a judge. And at that moment, within the darkness of the confessional, I understood that I was facing a man who had the power to destroy lives with a single word. and that had done just that, with full conscience. Did you condemn anyone knowing that this person was innocent? I asked, trying to keep my voice firm but feeling the anger start to rise. He did not respond immediately, but when he did it, his voice was lower, almost a whisper. Yes, a syllable, a single syllable that broke everything I believed about the balance of justice. I closed my eyes even in the darkness, trying to sue it, trying to understand how a man could say this so calmly, with such coldness. And where is this person now? I asked, although I knew the answer. Arrested, serving time. How long? Pause. 25 years. 25 years. 25 years. I let the words echo inside me. A quarter of century. A locked human being, day after day, night after night, paying for something he didn't do. Waking up in a cell, eating in a cell, aging in a cell, losing youth, dignity, hope, and the responsible man was there on the other side of the grid, confessing as if it were just another sin. And what did you come here to look for exactly? I asked, and for the first time in years, my voice came out with a weight that was not just priestly, it was human, it was anger contained, it was indignation. He noticed. I heard his sound moving slightly on the bench. I didn't come to seek acquittal, priest. I know I don't deserve it. I came because I need to say that out loud. I need someone to know. I can't take it anymore to carry it alone. Why don't you go to the police? Why not correct the error? My voice was higher now, more urgent. The Lord has the power to do that, has authority. Because if I do that, Father, it's not just me who falls. It is the whole court. It is the credibility of decades. It is public trust in the system. I would destroy more than I would save. It was a justification, a perverse logic, but still, a logic. And he believed in her, or at least, he had convinced himself of it. He had built this moral armor to protect himself. Do you want me to believe you are protecting the system? I asked, without hiding the tone of disbelief. No, priest. I want you to understand that I am protecting myself. I am protecting my career, my family, my reputation, and in doing so, I'm letting someone unfairly rot in a cell. Raw honesty, brutal. He was not trying to justify himself. It was not asking for understanding. It was just confessing. As a man who knows he is condemned but still wants to register, you want someone to know the truth. And what do you feel when you think of this person? I asked, feeling my voice shake. Silence. A long silence. Painful. Then he answered, and his voice trembled for the first time. I feel like I commit the crime every day. What a wake-up. I have coffee, given to the toga. I go up to the pulpit and judge others, while I know I'm worse than any of them. Worse than any of them. It was that. It was exactly that. He was not just a criminal. He was a criminal of toga. A man who used the law as a shield to protect his own mistake. A man who condemned others as he knew in the back of his soul that he himself was the greatest culprit of all. And suddenly, while listening to her heavy breath, I thought of the mini-hysteria that haunts me to this day. The phrase that came to mind at that moment and never left me again. From toga, he seemed untouchable, but when he spoke, he revealed that he had condemned an innocent. He said that the weight consumed him, but he could not go back. Since then, his voice echoes me as eternal sentence. Those words return to my mind like a hammer beating. Untouchable. He was indeed untouchable. Protected by the institution itself that it stains. Protected by toga, for the position, for the respect that everyone had for him. And that person, I said, trying to move on, trying to understand the dimension of what he was confessing. Do you know her name? Pause. I know. Say. I can't. Why? Because if I say the name, Father, you will look for the case. We'll turn newspapers, processes, documents, and I can't allow it. He was right. I would look, not as a priest, but as a man. I would turn around every news, every file, anything that led me to the truth, to take me to that wronged person. But he knew that, and so it kept the name locked, kept the secret kept. So why did you come here? I asked, my voice now loaded with frustration, impotence. If you won't correct, if you won't reveal, why tell me that? Because I need someone to know that I know. I need to divide the weight, even for a few minutes. Divide the weight, as if that were possible, as if confessing a crime was enough to relieve the pain of the suffering for him. You understand that I can't acquit him, doesn't it? I said finally, making it clear that there was no forgiveness for that. I understand, and yet it came. Even so, he was not there by God. He was there for himself, to try to start, even for a few minutes, the weight that choked him, to say aloud what carried in silence. But I knew it wouldn't work, because some blames don't come out. Some blames are so deep roots that they become part of who we are. They define us, consume us. I took a deep breath, trying to find some word that made sense, some guidance I could give, but there was nothing. Nothing I said would be enough. And then, before I said anything, he added something that made me freeze. Father, there's one more thing. One more thing. Always has. What? I asked, feeling my stomach to turn. He took a deep breath, and he said, with a calm that shivered me, the person I condemned, it wasn't the only one. It was not the only one. The words were suspended in the air as toxic smoke. I felt my chest squeeze. My hand, which rested on the stole, trembled slightly. How many? I asked, and my voice came out lower than I expected. Silence. He did not respond immediately. I heard the sound of his breath changing, getting heavier, as if he were calculating whether or not to continue, as if there was an invisible line that once crossed would not allow return. 4, he said finally. 4 destroyed lives. 4 innocent people locked behind bars. 4 torn families. 4 destinations deleted by deliberate decisions of a man who should represent the truth. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to keep the composure. But something inside me was breaking. It was not just indignation. It was horror, pure horror in the face of the magnitude of what he was confessing. 4 innocent people, I repeated, letting the weight of words echo. And did you know in all cases that they were innocent? Yes. The answer came quickly, dry, without hesitation, and that's what scared me. It was no doubt, it wasn't I think or maybe. It was absolute certainty. He knew, and condemned anyway. How is this possible, I asked, feeling the anger start to climb through the throat. How does a man condemn 4 people knowing they are innocent? He sighed, a long breath, loaded, as if he was carrying a weight he could never drop. Father, the judicial system does not work as people think. It is not about the truth. It is about conviction. It is about narrative. And when you are in charge, when you use the toga, when you go up to the pulpit, you become the truth. You are the truth. It was a confession within confession, an admission that he had not only made the mistakes, but perfectly understood the mechanics behind them. He knew exactly what he was doing. The first case, he continued, and his voice became lower, as if he was coming back in time. It was 7 years ago. A man accused of armed robbery. He had an alibi. He was with his sister in the hospital, accompanying the mother who was hospitalized. There were records. There were witnesses. But the prosecutor built a convincing narrative. He said the records were tampered with. He said his sister was lying to protect him. I heard the Madeira Ranger as he moved slightly on the bench, and I could have investigated better. It could have required more evidence, but I didn't, because the pressure was huge. The case was in all newspapers. The victim was an elderly woman respected in the community. Everyone wanted a quick conviction, and I gave them what they wanted. How many years? I asked. 12 years. 12 years of life torn from someone for convenience, by public pressure, for fear of seeming weak. And the other cases? I insisted, needing to know, needing to understand the extent of that. He took a deep breath again, as if preparing to dive deeper. The second case was 2 years later. A woman accused of drug trafficking. She claimed that her ex-husband had planted the drugs at her house to get her children's custody. There was evidence of that, text messages, threats recorded in police reports. But I ignored. I gave more weight to the police that arrested it. I gave more weight to the accusation. Why? I asked, feeling my voice shake. Because it was easier. Because the ex-husband was well related. Because complicating the case would mean reopening investigations. It would mean admitting that the police could have made a mistake. How many years? 15 years. A mother torn from her children. A locked woman. A life destroyed to keep the machine running without friction. And the other 2? I asked, knowing that there was still more. Knowing that each confession would be worse than the previous one. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was weaker, almost a whisper. The third case. It was the worst of all. The worst of all. I felt my stomach turn. A young man of 19 years accused of sexual aggression. The victim was the daughter of a local politician. The boy swore that the meeting had been consensual. There were messages between the two, loving messages even. But the girl's family, they pressed, very. And I knew he was telling the truth. He knew she had changed the version after her father found out about the relationship. But me, he stopped, as if the words were stuck in the throat. I condemned anyway, he concluded. How many years, I asked, but my voice was almost inaudible. 20 years. A 19 boy, half of his life, thrown away. And the room? I asked, although part of me I didn't want to know. There was a long silence, so long that for a moment I thought he would not answer. But then he said, and what he said froze me to his bones. The fourth case was the son of a colleague of mine. Son of a colleague. Like this? I asked, confused. He was a colleague judge. We worked in the same court. Our offices were in the same corridor. We greeted each other every day. And his son was accused of manslaughter. A car accident. He had drunk, hit another vehicle. The other person died. I felt my heart accelerate. There was clear evidence that he was drunk. There were witnesses. There was the breathalyzer test, but the father came to me, asked for a favor. He said his son was destroyed, that already suffered enough, that a condemnation would ruin his life forever. And you? Did you acquit? I asked, feeling the bile up. No, I can't acquit in such criminal cases, but I reduced the pity. I handled the circumstances. I treated as a case of simple manslaughter without aggravating. He took 3 years. He fulfilled a year and a half in semi-open regime, a year and a half for taking a life, while the others, innocent, fulfilled decades. And the victim's family? I asked, feeling anger at me. Protested? Very, but there was no appeal to change my sentence. Silence, a heavy silence, suffocating. I didn't know what to say. There were no words. There was no theological guidance to apply to something like this. This was not a common sin. That was monstrous. You understand what you did, isn't it? I said finally. It was not just judicial errors. It was a conscious betrayal of all that justice should represent. I know, Father. That's why I'm here. But being here doesn't change anything, I said, letting the hardness get into my voice. 4 people remain trapped. 4 lives are still destroyed. And the Lord continues to use the toga, continues to judge, keeps pretending to be fair. I don't pretend, Father, he answered. And for the first time I heard his voice. I know I'm not fair. I know I'm a fraud. I wake up every day knowing that. Seen the toga knowing that. I go up to the pulpit knowing it. So why don't you stop? Why don't you resign? Because it would be to admit. And if I admit, Father, all the other cases I judged, hundreds of them, will be reviewed. All will be questioned. I would destroy not only my career, but the credibility of the entire court. His logic was sick. It was a web of self-justification built to protect itself, but he was so tangled in her that he could no longer see the way out. And you think this is reason enough? I asked. Do you think protecting the institution is worth more than the freedom of 4 innocents? No, he said, and his voice broke. I don't think, but it is the choice I made. And now I can't go back. He was stuck, arrested by his own cowardice, arrested by their own decisions. And those 4 people were stuck by him. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts, trying to find some way. But there was not. There was no possible acquittal. There was no easy redemption. You said you can't go back, I said slowly. But there is one thing I need to know. What, if you had a chance to correct this, with no consequences for yourself, would you? There was a break. Long, very long. And then he answered, and his answer destroyed me inside. I don't know, Father. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know. He did not know if he would free 4 innocents, even without risk to himself. It was that. That was the measure of corruption that took over him. It wasn't just cowardice, it was something deeper. It was the death of consciousness. I was silent, digesting that, trying not to let the horror consume me completely. And then he said something that made me freeze. But priest, there's something I need to tell you. Something that makes it all worse. Even worse. How could something be even worse? What? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, each word fell like a blade. One of the 4 people died in prison. He died. The word was suspended in the air like a blade. I felt cold through my spine. My hands, which were once calm on the lap, closed involuntarily. The nails nailed the palm. Died, I repeated, my voice almost inaudible. One of the 4 people died in prison. Yes, he confirmed, and his voice was lower now, more tired, as if he were finally reaching the bottom of the well. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. I tried to keep the composure, but something inside me was shattering. It was not just indignation. It was horror, absolute horror. Which one? I asked, though I wasn't sure if I wanted to know. The first one, he said. The man accused of armed theft. The one who was with his sister in the hospital. The man of the alibi. The man who had proof of innocence. The man who was condemned anyway. How did he die? I asked, feeling my throat tighten. There was a break. Long, painful. Suicide. The word fell like a stone. Suicide. I felt my stomach turn. My hands trembled. I had to support them on the bank so as not to collapse. When? I asked, my voice coming out strangled. 2 years ago. He served 10 years of the sentence. He hanged himself in the cell. Left a letter. A letter. Of course it left. Innocent men always leave. It is the last attempt to scream the truth to a world I never wanted to hear. Did you read the letter? I asked, already knowing the answer. Lee. And what did she say? Silence. A silence that weighed like lead. He said he couldn't stand it anymore. That every day he woke up knowing that he was stuck for something he did not do, who had begged, shouted, tried to prove his innocence. But no one believed. Nor the prosecutor. Neither the lawyers. Neither, nor me. His voice broke in the last word. He wrote my name, priest. He wrote that he trusted that I would do justice. That I would look at the tests carefully. That I would see the truth. But I didn't see, or rather, I saw and ignored it. I felt angry to climb from the bottom of my chest, a warm, pulsating anger that made me want to scream. But I contained, because screaming would not bring that man back. It would not revert the 10 years of suffering. He would not erase the despair that led him to tie a sheet and end his own life. And his family? I asked, trying to keep my voice firm. The sister who was with him in the hospital. She fought to the end, tried resources, tried to reopen the case, but never did. And when he died, she gave up too. I heard she left the city. I don't know where. Left the city, fleeing the pain, running away from injustice, fleeing a system that killed her brother. Did you go to the funeral? I asked, knowing it was a cruel question, but needing to ask. No, he replied, and heard the shame in his voice. I didn't go. I didn't have the courage. It didn't have the courage. Of course it didn't. Because going to the funeral would be to look into the sister's eyes. It would be to see that man's body in the coffin. It would be confronted, face to face, the direct consequence of your cowardice. And the other three? I asked, trying to move on, trying to understand the full extension of it. Are they still alive? Yes, he said. At least as far as I know, as far as he knew, as if it were not for his responsibility to follow, as if it were not for his obligation to know what happened to the lives he destroyed. And you, have you tried to find out? I asked. Have you tried to know how they are? If you still have hope? If you still fight? No, priest, I can't do that. I can't get closer. It would be suspicious. It would be dangerous. Dangerous. For him. Always for him. Never for others. I took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that was consuming every part of me, trying not to let her explode, because exploding would not help. It would not change anything. You understand, I said slowly, choosing every word carefully, that it wasn't just an unfair condemnation, right? The Lord killed that man. I know, he whispered. No, I said, and my voice came out hard. I don't think you know. The Lord killed that man, not with your own hands, but with the pen, with the sentence, with the toga. The Lord took his life as certainly as if he had tightened his neck with his own hands. Silence, a dense silence, suffocating. And the other three, I continued, feeling my voice shaking, they're slowly dying, dying inside, rotting in cells, losing faith, hope, humanity. And everything is so, all this because you didn't have the courage to do what was right. I know, Father, he repeated, and heard the despair in his voice. I know. That's why I'm here. That's why I can't sleep anymore. That's why I wake up every day feeling that I'm drowning. But waking up feeling badly changes nothing, I said without mercy. It doesn't bring that man back, does not release the other three. It does not correct anything. I know, he said for the third time like a mantra. How to repeat the words could somehow relieve weight, but it didn't relieve it, and I knew that, and he knew too. I was silent for a long moment, digesting it all, trying to process the magnitude of the evil before me. It was not an explosive evil. It was not an obvious evil. It was a bureaucratic evil, an institutional evil, an evil committed in the name of order, convenience, system protection, and so it was even scarier, because that kind of evil doesn't need monsters. It only needs ordinary men who make cowardly choices. The Lord said, I started, trying to understand something that still bothered me. That can't go back because it would destroy the court. But, do you really believe that? Pause. I believe, he said. Did you just convince yourself of this to justify your own cowardice? The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were true, and sometimes the truth needs to be hard. He did not respond immediately, but when he did it, his voice was different, weaker, more broken. Maybe it's both. Perhaps I built this justification because it was the only way to continue living, the only way to look in the mirror without completely collapsing. It was the first time he admitted that. The first time he recognized that the logic he used to protect was in the background only fragile armor. And your family? I asked, changing direction. Do they know? No, he said quickly. They don't know anything. My wife, my children, they see me like a righteous man. A righteous man. If they knew. He didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to, because what he was saying was clear. He was more afraid of losing family admiration than justice, more fear of being exposed than continuing to destroy lives. And do you think this is love? I asked. Lying to them? Pretend to be someone who is not? No, priest. I don't think. But it's the only way I found to continue. Not to collapse completely. He was stuck. Completely stuck. Arrested by his own lies, his own choices, his own fear. And those three innocents were trapped with him. I took a deep breath. I felt the heavy air of the confessional enter my lungs. I smelled old wood, old sins, buried secrets. And then I thought again in the phrase that pursues me since that night. From toga, he seemed untouchable. But when he spoke, he revealed that he had condemned an innocent. He said that the weight consumed him, but he could not go back. Since then, his voice echoes me as eternal sentence. Untouchable. He was still untouchable. Protected by the institution, protected by the family, protected by his own cowardice that prevented him from publicly confessing. But there, in that confessional, he was not untouchable. There he was just a man, a broken man, consumed by guilt, but still unable to act. "Father," he said, breaking the silence, "do you think there is forgiveness to me?" The question fell like a bomb. Forgiveness. He was asking for forgiveness. After all, after 4 lives destroyed after a death, he wanted forgiveness. I was silent for a long time, because the honest answer, the true answer, it was no. But I was a priest, and part of me still believed, or wanted to believe, that there was possible redemption for everyone. "Forgiveness," I said finally, "it doesn't come from me, come from God. But God requires true repentance, and true regret is not just to feel guilty. It is acting, is correcting, it is doing justice." "What if I can't do justice?" he asked desperately. "So you are not really sorry," I said, letting the truth cut. "You are just afraid of the consequences." Silence. A long, painful, suffocating silence. And then he said something that made me freeze completely. "Father, there's something I haven't told you yet. Something about that man who died. Something that makes it all even more terrible. Even more terrible." "How could this be even more terrible?" "What?" I asked, feeling a shiver through my spine. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was shaking. "Before you die, he asked to talk to me, sent a letter to the court, asking for an audience, saying he had something important to say." My heart stopped. "And you, was it?" I asked, although I knew the answer. "No," he whispered. I ignored the request. I filed the letter, and 2 weeks later, he was dead. 2 weeks. 2 weeks between a desperate request to be heard and death. And he ignored it. "Do you know what he meant?" I asked, feeling my voice shake. "No, but I imagine." "What?" He paused, and then he said with a voice that was barely heard, "He wanted to beg me. I wanted to ask me for a last chance. I wanted to look into my eyes and make me see that he was innocent, and he was ignored, thrown away, discarded, like garbage." I felt a nausea rise. I felt the confessional turn around me. I felt the weight of all this crush me. "Father," he said, and his voice was broken, "do you understand now? Do you understand why I can't live like this anymore? To understand?" Yes, I understood, but understanding did not mean forgiving. And then, before I could say anything, he added one last sentence that destroyed me inside. "And the worst, Father, the worst is that if I could go back in time, I don't know if it would do it differently. I don't know if I would do it differently." The words were suspended in the air as a final sentence, as a confession within confession, like the admission that there was no real regret, just fear, only weight. I was silent. I didn't know what to say. There were no words in theology that applied to something like this. There were no verses. There were no prayers. There was only the emptiness. The emptiness of being before a man who had crossed the line between error and deliberate evil, and who knew it. I took a deep breath. I felt the heavy air of the confessional enter my lungs. I smelled old wood mixed with the cold sweat of guilt that filled that tiny space. "Father," he said, breaking the silence, "I haven't told you everything yet. It hasn't told everything yet. Of course, because men like him never deliver everything at once. They dose, they test, they release the truth in layers, as those who take shells out of an infected wound." "What is the most to tell?" I asked, and my voice came out tired, exhausted, as if I had already heard too much, and at the same time I knew that the worst was yet to come. He took a deep breath. I heard the sound of his breath change, getting heavier, more irregular, as if he was preparing to dive into everyone's darker place. "One of the cases, one of the 4, it was different from the others," he began, and his voice was shaking now, really shaking. "In others I just ignored the tests. I ignored the alibi. I let the error happen by omission. But in that case, Father, I protected someone. Protected." The word fell like a stone. "Who protected?" I asked, feeling my heart accelerate. "The real culprit." Silence. Such a dense silence that it seemed to suck the air from the environment. "You're saying," I started, trying to sue, "who condemned an innocent knowing who was the real culprit?" "Yes." Confirmation came quickly, direct, without hesitation, and that's what destroyed me inside. Because until then, as horrible as it was, I could still understand as omission, like cowardice. But that was something else. This was active participation. This was complicity. "Which of the cases?" I asked, my voice barely coming out. "The third," he said, "the 19 boy. The accused of sexual aggression. The boy, the one he had sentenced to 20 years for a crime he did not commit. the one whose loving messages with the girl he had ignored, the one who lost half of his life because of a lie. Did you know who had actually assaulted the girl? I asked, feeling the bile up. Pause, long, painful. Yes, I knew. Who? He hesitated. I heard his sound moving in the bench. I heard the Ranger Madeira. I heard the breath getting heavier. The politician's son, he said finally. Her brother. The brother. I felt my stomach turn. Wait, I said, trying to organize thoughts. Are you saying that the girl was assaulted by her own brother? Yes. And what the father, the politician? Did you know that? Yes. And that have you two decided to blame your boyfriend? Yes. 3 times yes. 3 times the confirmation of something monstrous. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. I tried not to let the anger consume me completely. I tried to keep some remnant of priestly composure, but it was hard, very difficult. How did this happen? I asked, needing to understand, needing to know how a man reaches this point. He sighed, a long sigh, loaded with years of weight. The father came to me, discreetly, even before the trial begins. He told me the truth. He said his son had problems, serious problems, that had done something similar before, but that they had managed to stifle. He said that if his son were exposed, his career, his father would be over, the whole family would be destroyed. And you, did you agree to help? I asked, my voice coming out higher than I intended. He offered me something in return. Offered something? Of course, there is always something. What? I asked, although I imagined it. A promotion. He had influence on the state government. It had connections. He said that if I did that, if I protected his son, he would guarantee that I was promoted to the higher court. And that's exactly what happened. 6 months after the trial, I was promoted. 6 months. 6 months between condemning an innocent and receiving a promotion. I felt a nausea take over me. I felt the confessional spin. I felt everything collapse. And the girl? I asked. The victim? Did she know she was lying? Yes. The father convinced her. He said it was better that way. That protecting his brother was to protect the family. She was young, scared, and agreed. She agreed because it was manipulated, because it was pressured, because it was easier to destroy a stranger's life than to expose the rot. And the boy, the innocent, I said, feeling my voice shaking. Is he stuck to this day for something he has not done, while the real aggressor is loose? Yes. Where is the true aggressor now? I asked, fearing the answer. Silence. A silence that lasted centuries. He committed another crime, the judge said, and his voice was almost inaudible now. Another crime. I felt my heart stop. What kind of crime? I asked, although I knew it would be terrible. Sexual aggression. Again. A year ago. Another girl. Another destroyed family. Another victim. Because he was loose. Because the judge had protected him. Because justice had failed deliberately. And was he arrested this time? I asked, desperate for some justice for the little ones. No. The father drowned again. Paid the victim's family. He sent his son out of the country. He is living in Europe now. Far away. Untouchable. Untouchable. Always untouchable. Men with money. Men with power. Men protected by other men who should represent the law. And the Lord, I said, feeling the anger take over every word. You knew this could happen. I knew that by releasing an aggressor he was putting other people at risk. I knew, he admitted, and his voice was broken. I knew. But the promotion, the career, I chose. He chose. Chose the promotion. Chose the career. He chose himself. And 2 victims paid the price. And an innocent is rotting in prison. I was silent for a long time. There were no words. There was nothing I could say that made a difference. You understand, I said finally, my voice coming out cold, hard, without mercy, that the Lord is an accomplice of 2 crimes? That you not only failed to do justice, but actively helped to perpetuate violence? I understand, Father. That's why I'm here. That's why I can't live with it anymore. But keep living, I said, letting the sarcasm cut. Still using the toga, continues to receive the salary, continues to be respected, because I have no choice, he replied desperately. There is always choice, I said firmly. You just choose the easiest, the most cowardly. Silence. He didn't answer, because there was nothing to say, because I was right and he knew that. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions inside me, trying to find some way to finish that, some way to make sense of that horror, but there was not, because there was no sense. There was just the rot, the corruption, the wickedness disguised as pragmatism. And then, I thought again in the phrase that pursues me since that night. From toga, he seemed untouchable, but when he spoke, he revealed that he had condemned an innocent. He said that the weight consumed him, but he could not go back. Since then, his voice echoes me as eternal sentence. Echo, always echoes, because some confessions do not come out. Some confessions stick. They are rooted inside us. and never leave. Father, he said, breaking the silence, do you think God can forgive me? The question fell like a bomb. Forgiveness. After all this, he still wanted forgiveness. God can forgive anyone, I said, keeping his voice firm, but forgiveness requires repentance, and regret requires action. If the Lord does not act, if you do not correct, then there is no possible forgiveness. What if I can't act? He asked desperately. So you are not really sorry, I said. You are just tired of carrying the weight. Silence. A silence that seemed eternal. And then he said something that made me freeze completely. Something that transformed everything. Something that made that confession even darker than I imagined possible. Father, there is one last thing. Something I never told anyone. Something that, if it reveals, can cost my life. Cost life. What? I asked, feeling a shiver through my spine. He took a deep breath, and when he spoke, each word came out slow, heavy, loaded with a fear I had never heard before. The politician, the aggressor's father, he knows I know, and he made it clear that if I ever try to correct it, if I try to free the innocent boy, he will destroy me. And not just me, my family too. He was being threatened. Does he have evidence? I asked. He has. Recordings, emails, evidence that I accepted the promotion in exchange for the favor. If he exposes this, Father, it is not just my career that ends. It is my freedom. I will be arrested. It was stuck, in all possible ways. Arrested by the guilt, trapped by fear, trapped by their own choices, and arrested by the threat of a man as corrupt as he. So you are telling me, I said slowly, that even if I wanted to do the right thing, couldn't it? Exactly. And what came here to look for? Acquittal for something that cannot correct? I came to seek peace, priest. Some way to continue living. Some way to support this. Peace. He wanted peace. But there was no peace possible. Not for him. Not after all this. I can't give you peace, I said, and my voice came out firm and, because peace without justice is just escape, and the Lord has been running away for years. He didn't answer, just stayed there, across the grid, breathing heavy, carrying the weight of it all, and I stayed by my side, knowing that this confession would be with me forever, knowing that somehow I was stuck now, trapped by the secret, trapped by silence, arrested for the helplessness of knowing the truth and not being able to do anything to her. And then, before getting up to leave, he said one last thing, a phrase that pursues me to this day, a phrase that makes me wake up in the middle of the night, sweating cold. Father, if something happens to me, if I appear dead, know that it was not an accident. If something happens to me, know that it was not an accident. The words were suspended in the air even after he got up and left the confessional. I heard his steps away from the ship, firm steps, as when it arrived. But now I knew what they carried. Now I knew the invisible weight he dragged every step. The church door opened, closed, and the silence came back. But it was not the same silence as before. It was a loaded silence, heavy, a silence that shouted. I was sitting in the confessional indefinitely. I don't know if it was minutes or hours. Time had lost meaning. I only existed. The darkness of that wooden box and the weight of what I had just heard. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. I tried to pray, but the words did not come. Why, how do you pray after hearing something like this? How do you ask God to enlighten a path when there is no way possible? How do you ask justice when justice itself has been corrupted from the root? I opened my eyes and looked at the confessional grid, that thin, old grid, who separated the priest from the penitent, that protected the identity, that kept secrets. But that night, I realized that the grid not only protected the confessor, she imprisoned me too, because now I knew. He knew there were 4 innocent people and prisoners. I knew one of them had died. He knew an aggressor was loose, protected, untouchable. He knew that there was a corrupt judge deciding the fate of others every day as he carried the blame for his own betrayals. And I couldn't do anything. The confession of confession is sacred. It is inviolable. It is the basis of everything we do here. If I broke this secrecy, I wouldn't just be cheating on a man. I would be betraying centuries of tradition. It would be destroying the confidence that allows people to come to us and give their darker secrets. But what about 4 people? And that man who died in prison, who begged for an audience and was ignored? And that 19th-year-old boy, serving 20 years for a crime he did not commit, while the true aggressor lived free in Europe? And the second victim, who suffered because the first crime was muffled? Where was their justice? Where was God in all? I got up from the confessional. My legs trembled. I walked to the altar. The candles still burned, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. The crucifix hung above the altar, Christ with open arms, the crown of thorns, the serene face in pain. I looked at him, and for the first time in many years, I didn't feel comfort. I felt angry, anger at a system that allowed this, Anger at a world where men of toga had more power than the truth. Anger at my own impotence, because I was just a priest, a listener, a guardian of secrets, but not an agent of justice. I knelt before the altar. I closed my eyes. I tried to find some answer, some guidance, some sign that there was a purpose in that, but there was only silence. And then, he returned to my mind, the phrase that pursues me since that night, the phrase that sums up everything I heard. From toga, he seemed untouchable, but when he spoke he revealed that he had condemned an innocent. He said the weight consumed him, but he couldn't go back. Since then, your voice echoes me as an eternal sentence. Eternal sentence. It was exactly that. He had condemned me too. Condemned to carry that secret. Condemned to know the truth and not be able to act. Condemned to live with the weight of 4 destroyed lives and the helplessness of not being able to save them. I got up. I walked to the sacristy. I took the purple stole and folded it carefully. I looked at her for a long moment. That piece of fabric that represented the authority to hear confessions, to acquit sins, to mediate between man and God. But that night she looked just a weight. In the following days I couldn't stop thinking about him. I imagined him waking up in the morning wearing his toga, going to court. I imagined him going up to the pulpit, beating the hammer, deciding about the lives of others. I imagined him coming home, having dinner with his family, pretending to be a fair man. And I imagined the others, the 3 who are still in prison, waking up in cells, eating in metal trays, looking at the bars, losing hope, day after day, year after year. And the man who died, the first, the one who left a letter, the one who begged for an audience and was ignored. I imagined his last moments, the sheet in the hands, the final decision, the silence of the cell, the absolute loneliness of dying, knowing that he was innocent and that no one believed. And I carried this to me, because there was no other choice. I tried in the following weeks to find some way to act, without breaking confidentiality. I considered sending anonymous letters. I considered looking for lawyers. I considered 1,000 ways to make the truth come out without revealing the source. But they all had the same problem. There was no evidence, only the word of a confessor in a confessional. And if I tried anything, he would know, and the politician would know, and both would guarantee that nothing would change, and maybe they did something worse, because men with power protect power, and men with secrets kill to keep secrets. I also thought about his final sentence, the warning. If something happens to me, if I appear dead, no, it wasn't an accident. Did he really believe that? Was the politician able to kill him to protect his son? Or was it just a paranoia of a man consumed by guilt? I don't know. And this is one more thing I carry. Because if something happens to him, I will know, and I will not be able to do anything. Months passed. I continued my routine. Masses, confessions, prayers, visits, everything as always was. But something had changed inside me. I didn't see justice the same way. Before, I believed that the system, although imperfect, worked, that the truth eventually prevailed, that good men made fair decisions. But now I knew justice is just an idea, an abstraction, and that, in practice, it is decided by failed, cowardly, corrupt men, and that some of these men use togas, and that they seem untouchable, until they talk. Sometimes when I'm alone in church at night after everyone left, I return to the confessional. I sit next to me, I look at the grid, and I hear his voice again. I condemned an innocent. He died in prison. I protected the true culprit. I don't know if it would do it any different. The words echo, always echo, and I realized that that night was not just a confession, it was a transfer. He took the weight out of him and put it on me, divided the guilt, divided the secret, and now, somehow twisted, I also carry part of those 4 convictions, because I know, and I do nothing, and that erodes me. I wonder sometimes if he will return, if one day the confessional door will open again, and I will hear that serious, paused, polite voice. I wonder if he will have corrected something. If you have found courage, the justice will have chosen instead of self-preservation. But deep down, I know not, because men like him don't change. They just carry. They load until I can't stand it anymore, and then either completely collapse or transfer the weight to someone else. And I was that person. Sometimes in masses, I look at the congregation. I see faces, families, children, and I wonder how many secrets there are there. How many culpted, how many silent injustices, and I wonder how many times justice failed without anyone knowing. How many innocents are stuck at this very moment while the culprits sleep quietly. How many corrupt judges decide destinations while protecting their own mistakes. How many victims suffer in silence because the system has failed them. And how many priests like me carry secrets that can never reveal. I have no answers. I only have the weight, and the certainty that that night something died inside me. It was not the faith. Faith is still here, fragile, but present. It was innocence, the belief that good always wins, that the truth always prevails, that justice in the end is done, because it is not always. And sometimes the men who should guarantee justice are the ones who destroy it most. I close my eyes. I take a deep breath. I try to let it all go, but I can't, because that voice still echoes. Detoga, he looked untouchable, and it was, and it remains. And I, arrested in the confessional, can do nothing but carry the weight of what I know. That night I closed the confessional door for the last time. I deleted the candles. I locked the church. I walked to my house under the dark sky without stars. And since then, every time I see a toga, every time I hear about a judgment, every time someone mentions justice, I hear his voice, and I remember that sometimes the biggest crimes are committed by those who should protect us from them, and that the confessional, that wooden box that should be a place of redemption, can become a prison, for the confessor, and for those who hear, because now I'm condemned too, condemned to know, condemned to silence, sentenced to carry forever the weight of justice that has never been done, and this is my eternal sentence.